Databases are the most powerful feature in Notion, and in this video you're going to learn everything you need to know about how to create databases and customize them in Notion, and in doing so you're going to be able to create a lot of powerful tools within your Notion workspace, which could include things like a task manager, a note-taking system, a finance tracker, and so much more. You can build pretty much anything you want using Notion databases. Now in this video we're going to be building a simple recipe tracker, and along the way you're going to learn everything you need to know about Notion databases. Okay, let's start with the fundamentals. What is a database? So in the context of Notion, a database is a structured collection of information. You can store, organize, and even manipulate the data as you please. So here's a really simple database that I created to track books that I'm reading in Notion. So as you can see in the first column we have the name of the book, in this column we have the genre of the book, and in this column we have a checkbox that I can simply just check off once I have read the book. Now another feature of Notion databases that you need to know is that each entry inside of a database is actually a page. So I could open up any of these and it will bring up a page, as you can see. So I could add anything I like to this page. So I could add, for example, my book notes, I could add a to-do list, I could even add more pages and more databases inside of this page if I like. That's the beauty of Notion. Now, one of the things that I love about Notion databases is that you can view the data in different ways. So for example, instead of this table view that I currently have, I could view this data on a board view like this and group together the books based on their genre, which is what I've done for you on this tab. Next, I want to talk to you about how I personally am using databases within my Notion space. So the first template that I want to show you is my second brain, which is an all-in-one productivity system. This is just composed of a few different key databases. So we have the task manager here, which is a database. I have various different views, so you can see overdue tasks here. This is your main task list, and as I said, this is just a database, but I've played around with the settings to create a more advanced system. And we also have a virtual notebook, which again is another database, but I've cleverly put it together so you can see all of your favorite notes and any recent notes. Another template that I have is my reading tracker. So here we have my current reading list. So I have these little cards here which give you an overview of all of the books you're reading, including the progress. So again, this is all set up using databases. And finally, I also have an advanced finance tracker which I use to track my transactions, to track things like my total incoming and outgoings for the month, and even to track the balances on different cards. And again, this is all made up using databases. And if you are interested in any of the templates that I've shown in this video, they are available on my store, so I'll leave a link in the description box below. Okay, so to add a new database, the easiest way is to type in /database, and you'll see these two different options. We have database inline and database full page. Now, the key difference is that inline databases can be added to an existing page, whereas full page databases will create a separate standalone page that will be linked to from the existing page. So for inline, you can add them to any page within your Notion workspace, and you can add them wherever you like on the page. So I've just added one here on this page, and as you can see, it's within the page that we've already created. Now, the second type is a full page database. So let me just add one of those quickly, full page. And this essentially just creates a standalone page just for that database. So adding one will take you over to a brand new page, as you can see, with a blank database. So you can obviously fill out and populate this database. Let's say it was a reading tracker. And if we now go back to the previous page, that database that we just created is now stored inside this page. Now, one of the key things to know is that with the full page databases, you can't add anything else to this page. So if I wanted to add something below, like some text, for example, you can't. This is just a dedicated page just for this database, so you cannot add anything else to it. But if you want to see this database on another page within your workspace, then you can do that with a link to view database. Okay, so I'm now back on the previous page. So this is the page here that links to our full page database, but I want to see that database on this page. So let's set up a link to view. So you can actually set up a link to view of any database, whether it's inline or full page, and you can set up as many of these linked views as you like. So linked databases are essentially synced copies of the same database. So if you update the data in one, it will also update on the other. So here's how to set one up. So say I want to add that reading tracker database onto this page, I can type in /linked view and select this linked view of database block. I then just need to select which database I want to link to. So I'm going to type in reading tracker and select this one, and that's going to allow me to pull through the existing view that we had on the other page. So here is the reading tracker that we just set up. So this is a linked view. So if I change anything on here, as I said, it will update on the other page. Let's just add another book as an example. Okay, so I've just added this book. Let's head back over to the original reading tracker. And as you can see, that book has now been added on here as well. So they are synced copies of the same database. Next, let's talk about database properties. properties. So you can add a range of different properties to a database, which allows you to store and organize different types of information like text, numbers, dates, and more. Let's build a database together as an example, and I'll show you all of the different properties that you can add to your databases. So let's build a recipe database as an example. So I'm simply going to type in /database, and for this one, let's do a database inline, and this is going to be our recipe tracker, and I'm just going to hide the database title. Okay, so the first column name is a mandatory column and you can't delete it. It's the column that actually creates the pages, which is why it cannot be deleted. You can, however, change the name of the column. So for example, I could change it to recipe name instead, and in here we can actually list the name of the recipe. So essentially how this works, every recipe that I add into this database is going to be a page. So let's add one as an example. Okay, and that is a page. So you'll see this open button here, which means I can open it, and you will see an entire page here. So you could, for example, use this page to actually write the recipe and the ingredient list. Okay, so I'm just going to add a few more as an example. Now, all Notion databases come with this default tags property. Now, I usually actually just delete this because in most cases it's not relevant. So I'm just going to click on here and hit delete. Okay, so now let's start adding some properties. So to add a new property, you want to click on the plus symbol here, and it will bring up a list of all of the different property types here. So let's work our way down the list. So the first property type is text. Now this one is pretty simple. It's just a text box. So you can write in here essentially anything that you like. So in this example, we could add a text property and name it description. So we could then write just a brief description of the recipe in here. So for example, for spaghetti bolognese, let's add a short description. So the text property is pretty useful. You can use it for a lot of different things. Now, the next property we're going to look at is the number property, which again is fairly self-explanatory. You could use this for a ton of different things. For example, with our recipe tracker, we could have the number of ingredients. So in here, I could simply just type in how many ingredients this recipe requires. So maybe this one is 8, maybe this one is 5, and so on. Now, you can actually format number columns in many different ways. So if I just click on here and edit the property, you can actually change the number format here. So I could change it to a %, or I could change it to a currency. So Notion comes with a ton of different currencies, so you should be able to find the one that is applicable to you. So as an example, let's change it to US dollar, and this actually could be the cost of the dish, so how much it costs to buy the ingredients for this dish. And then obviously in this column, I'll simply input how much it would cost. So let's just say it costs, I don't know, $3 for this one. And another thing that I love about number properties is that you can actually calculate them at the bottom. So if you click on this word calculate here, you can do a range of different calculations like the average cost, the total cost, the minimum, etc. Let's go with the average cost. So as you can see, this is now working out the average of all the numbers in the table, which is pretty useful. I could also change it to sum if I wanted to add all of these costs together. So you can also use number properties to create progress bars. So let's add another one for a rating out of 10. So this one is going to be rating out of 10. So where it says show as, I'm actually going to show this as a bar so that we get a progress bar. And because I want it to be a rating out of 10, where it says 100 here, I'm actually just going to change that to 10. So in this box, I can then input my rating out of 10. So let's say this one was a 7 out of 10. And as you can see, we now get a nice progress bar to show my rating. So that's just a pretty fun use case of numbers. Next, let's look at the select property. So there are actually two different types of select property. There's the normal select property, and then there's the multi-select option. So the select property allows you to select one item from a list, whereas the multi-select property allows you to select multiple items from a list. So that's the only difference between them. So let's start by adding a select property for a recipe type, and I'm going to add a few different options here. So let's say breakfast, lunch, dinner, so on. Okay, so I've added these options. So I can now select for each recipe what type of recipe it is. So let's put this one as dinner, for example. Now this select property might actually work better as a multi-select. So let's change it. If I go on edit property and where it says type, I can actually change it here. So let's change it to a multi-select. So now I can select multiple different recipe types for each recipe. So for example, for French toast, I might want to be able to select breakfast and lunch. Now you can also use the multi-select to add a recipe tag. So let's add another multi-select onto here, and let's name it recipe tags. So for example, you could have tags like favorite for a favorite recipe, Italian, French, easy. So I can then just add the appropriate tags to the different recipes. You can then search these tags later using the search function here to find recipes that match the tag. So I could just type in Italian and it will just bring up anything that is tagged as Italian. Now the next property that we have is the status property. Now this works really well for things like task lists or project lists, but let's add it in here. So you can simply choose between the different statuses. process either not started, in progress, or done. Now you can actually change or add other options in here. So if I edit property, so for the recipe tracker, instead of in progress, it might be nice to add something like buying ingredients, and I could add another in progress option like added to meal planner. It's just an easier way to track the status, and it's more relevant to the actual database that I have. So you can add as many options as you like here, and I can then use this to select the option. So you can essentially just add options that are more closely related to what you're actually tracking, which is really useful. The next property is the date property, which, as you can imagine, is where you input a date. So you simply click on the box and it will allow you to select the date. So if I just go with this one, it will input today's date. Now you can actually also add a range of dates. So if you switch on this end date toggle here, it will allow you to select an end date, and that will display like this in the box. Now a quicker way to do that is select the first date, hold down the shift key on your keyboard, and then select the end date, and that will automatically toggle this end date on for you and add a range of dates. So that's just a quicker way to do it. You can also include the time if that's relevant to you. So you can just input the time here, and you can also set a reminder. So Notion will essentially just give you a reminder so you can decide which one is most appropriate for you. So for example, I could be reminded 10 minutes before, and that will give me a little reminder when it's due. So as an example, I could maybe use this column to select which date I next want to make this recipe on. Next, we have the person property, which allows you to link to a person within your Notion team or anyone associated with your Notion account. So if you're just using Notion for personal use, then you probably won't ever use this one. But if, for example, I were to share this database with my boyfriend, I could then assign a person to each recipe. So I'll just assign myself to this one. So I could input who is going to make each recipe or something like that. So the person property works particularly well for databases that are related to projects or tasks, because you can assign projects or tasks to different people. So if you are planning on using Notion for your team or your business, then this property will be super useful. The next property is files and media, which allows you to upload a file. So this could be a PDF or an image or anything like that. So in this case, I could upload a photo of the dish after I've made it, or I could upload a PDF with the recipe on it. So let's upload a photo for this one. So to add a file, you simply click on the box and it will ask you to upload the file. You can also embed a link if it's easier. So I actually just grabbed an image off of Google Images and copied the link. So I'm just going to paste it in here and select link. And that has then grabbed the image for me from Google Images. So that's a handy little hack as well. If you don't want to download and re-upload an image, you can just copy the link and paste it in here. So that has now been added. So if I ever want to view the images, I can just click on here and it will show me the images. The next property is a checkbox, which simply just adds in a checkbox that you can check off. So I could, for example, add a checkbox for made ? And I could then just check this off after I've actually made the recipe for the first time, like this. So it's pretty simple and self-explanatory, and you can add as many checkboxes as you like. Now, because we're adding a lot of properties to this table, the first column is now disappearing from view when I scroll over here. So one handy Notion hack is that you can actually freeze the first column. So if I just click up here on the column and just select freeze up to column, it will now freeze this column, and I can just make that a bit smaller as well. So it's really handy because now if I scroll along here, as you can see, this column is always visible, which just makes it easier to be able to look at all of the different properties and still reference it to the original recipe name. We then have the URL property, which is where you can simply just paste in a URL. So in this example, I could paste in a link to an article that I found online with the recipe for this dish, like this. We also then have the email and phone properties, which are pretty self-explanatory. I don't use them often, but if you're creating something like a client list or a CRM, then you may find them useful. And I'm just going to skip past the formulas, relations, and rollups for now. We will come back to them later in the video, but they are more advanced Notion properties. So I want to talk about a few other things related to the databases, and then we'll come back to these later. And then you can also add the created time, which will input when the page was created, as you can see here. And the last few here are quite self-explanatory. So we have the created by, which will input the person who created the entry, the last edited time, which will input when that entry was last edited by, which will input the person who last edited the entry, and finally the ID, which you can use if you need to generate an ID. So next I want to talk about database views. So views are essentially just different ways of looking at the same database. Now, there are currently 6 different ways to view a database, and I'm going to cover each one right now and explain why you might want to use one over the other. So the first one is a table view, which is what we've been using throughout the entire video so far. It's simply a table version of the database. So these tend to be the easiest to edit, as you can view all of the data in one place. Now, I usually build all of my databases from scratch on the table view because it's really easy to add new rows to the table and also to add new properties, and you can easily visualize all the information as you build. Now, you can also add new tabs onto each database if you want to be able to click between the different views. So let's add a new tab for the next type of view, and the next type of view is a board board view, which shows each entry in the table as a card, and these cards are grouped together. Now the entries are usually grouped together based on the select property within the database, so in this case it's grouping it based on our recipe type. You can actually change the way that they're grouped, so if you just click on the three dots here and select group, if you click on group by, it will then allow you to choose any of the properties within the database to group them by. So if I actually want to group them by their recipe tags rather than the type, I can click on there and it will change it to group them by the recipe tag. So I'm actually just going to keep it as the recipe type for now. Now the board view is a great way to organize your databases into different areas, and you can actually also group them based on their status, which makes it super easy to see where you're at with each item. This works particularly well if you have a task list or a project list database. Now you can also play around with what's displayed on each card. So if I just click on the three dots here and select properties, I can actually show some of the other properties on the card. So let's just say that I want to show the recipe type. As you can see, that's now displayed on the card, and maybe I also just want to see the cost as an example. And you can also play around with the order as well, so I could put the cost, for example, above the recipe type if I wanted to. So even on the board view, you can still easily add new entries. You just click on the plus new button under the group that you want to add the entry to. So for example, this one is breakfast, so if I click on here, it will add a new entry for me under breakfast. So let's just say that I want to do an English breakfast. And if I want to add any more details, I can simply click on the card and it will open up the dedicated page, and here are all of the different properties from the table. So I can simply just fill these out, and down here is the actual page. So that's where I can actually write the recipe. Next we have the timeline view, which isn't one that I personally use very often as it only really works well for specific database types, but it will show entries based on a timeline. So the entries will show up based on the date property that you have within the database. So here's an example of some projects that you might have coming up, so it might be nice to see these in a timeline view like this. I also love that you can easily drag and move these around to change the dates, and you can also drag these out as well to make the time frame longer, and this would then update the dates within the date property for you. And if you do have multiple different dates within the database, then you can actually choose which date the timeline view is based on as well, which is really handy. The next view is the calendar view, which also deals with dates like the timeline view, but instead it shows your entries on a calendar. So let's convert this project's database into a calendar, and this is what it looks like. So it'll automatically come up with a monthly view, but you can also change it to a weekly view if you prefer. So you can just click on the three dots here, select layout, and here it will say show calendar as month, so you can change this to week if you prefer to see it as a weekly view like this. Now I personally think that the calendar view makes it much more easy to visualize your entries compared to the timeline view, and you can also show other properties on the calendar like the status, the tags, or anything else. So if you just click on the three dots here, select properties, and let's for example add the status on here as well, so that will show up on the card here. So these work really well for task lists, so I actually utilize a calendar view in my second brain template to easily visualize all of my upcoming tasks. So it's super easy to add new items to the calendar. You simply just click on the plus symbol here and just type in the name of the task. So let's just say I need to call my accountant. You can also fill out all of the database properties here as well, and as you can see, that's now been added to the calendar. And by adding it straight onto the calendar view like this, the date is auto-populated, so you don't actually need to bother selecting the date. And the next view that we have here is the list view, which is one that I use all the time. It simply shows all of the entries within a list, and you can then choose which properties you want to display in the list next to it. So to display more properties in the list, we can simply click on the three dots up here, select properties, and then decide which properties we want to show alongside the entries in the list. So for our recipes database, we can already see the recipe type, so let's also maybe just add the cost on here as well. So if you just click this little eye symbol, it will then add it into the list, and as you can see, the type and the cost is now visible on the list. So for a couple of these like this one, I've not actually inputted the cost, which is why it's not showing up, but if I click on here, I can also add the cost on here. So let's just say it's $2. So lists are a great way to view information, and they work particularly well if you want to search your database for a particular piece of data, or if you're adding filters. So let's say that I want to find a breakfast recipe, so I can simply just use the search bar here, type in breakfast, and as you can see, it's just going to bring up anything that has been tagged as breakfast. So it's a really easy way to find that information. And I also use the list view in my second brain template to view my task list for the day. So as you can see, I can view all of my tasks, see the priority, and also check them off using the checkbox once they're complete. And I've also grouped this list based on when the tasks are due, so that I can easily open and close the appropriate toggles. And the last type of database view is the gallery view, which is my personal favorite as I think it's the most aesthetic looking one. So these are particularly great if you want to show images on the cards. So for the recipe database, we could turn this into a gallery view, and we'll be able to see the images that we've added for each entry here on the card. So to actually display the photo on the card, we simply want to click on the three dots here, select layout, and here you'll find this card preview, and it's currently set to page content, but we're actually going to change it to the files and media option because I've uploaded the photo of each of the dishes as a file. So if I click on that and just give it a second, and as you can see, that is now displaying the images on the card, which looks really nice. And you can also add other properties onto the cards here as well. So let's just click on the three dots here, select properties, and we can decide which properties from the original table that we want to add onto the card. So let's, for example, just add the recipe type and the cost on here as well. So as you can see, they're now displaying on this card. So you might have noticed that the gallery view is very similar to the board view in that we get these cards appearing for every item in the list. Now the main difference is that on the gallery view, they're not grouped by a particular property, which is what the board view does. However, you can actually also add grouping to the gallery view. However, it does show up a little bit differently. So let's just say that I want to group these together based on the recipe type. So if I click on the three dots here, select group, and I can group them based on one of the properties within the database. So let's group them based on recipe type, and that will add each group as a toggle. So you can then just open and close these toggles as you please. And as you can see, this looks a lot different to the board view, which groups them in columns like this. Okay, next we're going to talk about sorting and filters. So you can also add a sort to your databases, which allows you to arrange your database entries based on a specified piece of criteria. So for our recipes database, we might want to sort these alphabetically so it's easy to locate the recipes. So in that case, we can add a sort by clicking on the sort button here. And we actually want to sort based on the recipe name, and you want to set it to ascending to go from A to Z. So if we just have a look at the list, as you can see, these have now been sorted alphabetically, and you can change this to descending if you want to start at Z and go to A. And for things like a task list like this one, you actually might want to sort them based on the due date. Now, interestingly, on Notion, you can actually add a secondary sort like priority, which is what I've done here. So the priority is a select property, and it's actually going to sort them based on the order of this list. So this sort here means that the items will primarily be sorted by their due date, but then if we have multiple tasks on the same date like this one, they will then be sorted based on their priority. So it's going to go from high to low. And you can also add filters to your database, which allows you to only display certain database entries that match specific criteria or conditions. So in its simplest form, we could add a filter to only show dinner recipes as an example. So to do that, I can click on the recipe type and add a filter, and I'm actually just going to select dinner as the option. And as you can see, now that I've added that filter, only entries where the recipe type is set to dinner are showing in the table. Now you can also add advanced filters where you set complex conditions and criteria. So for example, let's remove this filter to start. And I'm going to click add filter, and we're actually going to click on this add advanced filter option, which is going to bring up this page where we can actually add a filter with multiple conditions. So for example, I could say only display entries where the recipe type is set to dinner and the cost of the recipe is less than $5. So if I add that filter, as you can see, it's now only displaying one recipe where the recipe type is set to dinner and it costs less than $5. And you can actually add as many conditions as you like to these filters. So let's just delete the filter for now. Now you can also use this search bar here to quickly find recipes. So let's say that I have a long list of recipes. I want to quickly be able to find my French toast recipe. So I can simply just type in French toast in here and that will automatically pop up at the top. And the search bar will actually pull up entries if any of the properties here contain the inputted text. So I could actually type something like breakfast, and that will bring up anything that is tagged with breakfast. Okay, so now that you understand how databases work, I want to come back to some of the more advanced properties that I skipped over earlier. So the next property that I want to talk about is the relation property, which actually allows you to connect two different databases together. So let's also say that I have an ingredient list database that I use to keep track of all the ingredients that I need to buy. So here I've got the name of the ingredient, and I've simply just got a checkbox here where I can check if I have the item or not. So wouldn't it be great if in our recipes database, I could actually select which ingredients each recipe needs directly from this ingredient list? So let's add a relation property to do that. So I'm going to click on the plus symbol, and we're going to select the relation property. It's firstly going to ask me which database I want to link to. So in this case, it's going to be our ingredient list. You want to ensure the limit is set to no limit so that I can add as many ingredients as I like. And I also want to show this on our ingredient list as well. And I'm going to click add relation. You can change the name of this. So let's just change this to ingredients. Now, as you can see, when I click on this box, it brings up all of the ingredients from the ingredients database. So I could just select the ones that I need for this recipe. So the ingredients I added were actually for the chocolate fudge cake. So if I just click on that one, let's just add a few of these ingredients like this. So these ingredients have now all been added to the chocolate fudge cake recipe. recipe. If we then take a look down here at the ingredients database, it now shows next to it which recipes I have that use this ingredient, which is also pretty handy too. Now the next advanced property that I want to share with you is the rollup property, which goes along with the relation property. Now a rollup allows you to grab data from another database and pull it into this one. Now the first thing to know is that you can only use a rollup if the two databases are already connected together using a relation property. So because I've just added this relation between the recipes database and the ingredients database, I could now add a rollup to pull through some of the data from the ingredients database into this one. So let's start by adding our rollup property. So I could simply use it to count how many ingredients we have for this recipe. So let's call this number of ingredients. So it's first going to ask me to select a relation. So this will bring up all of the relations that you have between different databases. So in this case, we've only added one relation. It's with the ingredients database. So let's select that one. Next, it will ask you which property you want to grab from the related database. So this will bring up all of the different options in the table. So in this case, we're just going to grab the name, and then it's going to ask you what you want to calculate. So in this case, as you can see in our number of ingredients column, is currently just showing the original, but I actually want to just count how many items there are in here so I can count the number of ingredients. So if I click on calculate, it will allow me to count all. So if I click on that, as you can see, it's now counting them and it's telling me that there are 7 ingredients for this recipe. Now I could also use a rollup property like this one to count how many ingredients I already have. So that's based on this got checkbox. So I could ask it to grab the got checkbox and then count how many of them are checked. So let's add one more rollup property up here, rollup. So this one is going to be the ingredients that we have. So I'm just going to call it ingredients got. Firstly, we'll select the relation. So again, we're going to do ingredients. Next, we'll select the property. So in this case, we're going to go with the got checkbox because I actually want to count how many of the ingredients do I already have in my possession. And then it's going to ask me what I want to calculate. So in this case, I want to count how many of those checkboxes are checked. So that's the one I'm going to select. And now if we take a look at the ingredients got column, this rollup is pulling through that 4 of the 7 ingredients I already have in my possession. So I can actually check that down here myself. So as you can see, 4 of these checkboxes are checked, so that rollup is working correctly. So that's quite a simple overview of how relations and rollups work. I do also have an entire in-depth video on relations and rollups where I cover them in more detail, give tons of examples, and I show you some more advanced use cases. So I'll link to that video in the description box if you want to check it out. And the final advanced property that we haven't covered yet are formulas. Now, I could probably talk about formulas for hours and hours because there is just so much that you can do with them. So let's start by adding a few simple ones. So the first way that you can use formulas is to do math for you. So let's say that I run a jewelry store, and here is a very simple database that I've set up with each item in my store, the current stock level, and then how much that item usually sells for. Now I want to create a formula to automatically work out the total value of my stock. So if I sold all of this stock, how much money would I make? So simply, I just want to multiply the stock level with the price, and that would give me the stock value. So let's add a formula to do it. So I'm going to click on the plus symbol, and we're going to select the formula property, and let's name this one stock value. And to actually input the formula, we need to click on this formula edit button, and that's going to bring up this panel, which is where we're actually going to input the formula. So in this sidebar here, you're going to see all of the properties within the table. So I simply want to do our stock. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to add it into the formula. I'm then going to multiply using the little star symbol, and I want to multiply that by the price. So I want to do stock multiplied by price, and I'm just going to hit done. And as this is a number, I also need to set the number format. So instead of a number, I actually want to see this as a US dollar so that I can actually see the total price. And as you can see, that is now being worked out for us. Now, formulas can be a lot more advanced, and we can incorporate things like text and if statements. Now, if statements allow you to return a specific result if a condition is true. So let's add a simple one in here. So I actually want to create a formula that shows me the current stock status. So let's say that when my stock level falls below 10, I want the formula to display the words low stock. Otherwise, it should display in stock. So let's add another formula to do that. And this is going to be our stock status. And we're going to click formula edit. So we're simply going to write if open parentheses, and we're going to add in the stock property. So if the stock is less than, so I'm adding in the less than symbol here. So if it is less than 10, comma, and then you're going to tell it what you want it to display. So if this statement here is true, I want it to display the words low stock. You just want to add that in between 2 quotation marks here. I'm going to add another comma, and then we can tell it what we want the formula to display if this statement here isn't true. So if the stock is not lower than 10, then you should just display the words in stock. And again, you want to just make sure that's written inside 2 quotation marks. I'm then going to close the parentheses and click done. So now the formula is working. As you can see, for the necklace, the stock is 9, so it is displaying low stock because that is less than 10. However, for the earring, the stock is 40, so it is displaying in stock. As I said, you can make these formulas super complex, but that's just a few simple examples of how to utilize them. And that's it. That's everything you need to know about Notion databases. Remember to check out all of my pre-made Notion templates over on my store, including my advanced second brain template, which is an all-in-one productivity system. I'll leave a link in the description box below. And if you did find this video useful, then I'd really appreciate if you could give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, as I post new Notion tutorials like this one twice a week.